will easily be seen how the sun, although always parallel to the surface of the earth, must appear to ascend when approaching and descend after leaving the meridian or noonday position. What can be more common than the observation that, standing at one end of a long row of lampposts, those nearest to us seem to be the highest, and those farthest away the lowest, whilst, as we move along towards the opposite end of the series, those which we approach seem to get higher, and those we are leaving behind appear to gradually become lower. It is an ordinary effect of perspective for an object to appear lower and lower as the observer goes farther and farther away from it. Let anyone try the experiment of looking at a lighthouse, church spire, monument, gas lamp, or other elevated object from a distance of only a few yards, and notice the angle at which it is observed. On going farther away, the angle under which it is seen will diminish, and the object will appear lower and lower as the distance of the observer increases, until, at a certain point, the line of sight to the object and the apparently uprising surface of the earth upon or over which it stands will converge to the angle which constitutes the vanishing point, or the horizon, beyond which it will be invisible. Heliocentrists would have you believe the very opposite of what every human who has ever walked the earth has seen with their own eyes. It is obvious to any child and sovereign-minded adult that the sun, moon, stars, and planets, every light in the sky above, revolves around the motionless earth beneath our feet. It is also plain to see that the sun and moon are both approximately the same size and situated relatively close to Earth, not 400 times divergent and millions upon millions of miles away. To abandon your senses and everyday experience in favor of such unfounded science fiction fantasies is a fallacy of appeal to authority so extreme that it leaves the brainwashed believer impotent to trust his own natural instincts and forever thereafter chained to the fantastical explanations of astronomical charlatans. the flat Earth model, the Sun and Moon luminaries revolve around the Earth once every 24 hours for the Sun and approximately 25 hours for the Moon, illuminating like spotlights the areas over which they pass. The Sun's annual journey from tropic to tropic, solstice to solstice, is what determines the length and character of days, nights, and seasons. This is why equatorial regions experience almost year-round summer and heat, while higher latitudes north and especially south experience more distinct seasons with harsh winters. The heliocentric model claims seasons change based on the ball Earth's alleged axial tilt and elliptical orbit around the Sun. Their flawed current model even places us closest to the Sun, 91,400,000 miles, in January, when it is actually winter, and farthest from the Sun, 94,500,000 miles, in July, when it's actually summer throughout much of the Earth. They say due to the ball Earth's tilt, different places receive different amounts of direct sunlight, and that is what produces the seasonal and temperature changes. This makes little sense, however, because if the Sun's heat travels over 90 million miles to reach the ball Earth, how could a slight tilt, a mere few thousand miles maximum, negate the Sun's 90 million mile journey, giving us simultaneous tropical summers and Antarctic winters? Thomas Winship said, "The Earth is a stretched out structure which diverges from the central north in all directions towards the south. The equator, being midway between the north center and the southern circumference, divides the course of the Sun into north and south declination. The longest circle around the world, which the Sun makes, is when it has reached its greatest southern declination. Gradually going northwards, the circle is contracted. In about 3 months after the southern extremity of its path has been reached, the Sun makes a circle around the equator. Still pursuing a northerly course as it goes round and above the world, in another 3 months, the greatest northern declination is reached, when the Sun again begins to go towards the south. In north latitudes, when the Sun is going north, it rises earlier each day, is higher at noon, and sets later, while in southern latitudes, at the same time, the Sun, as a matter of course, rises later, reaches a lesser altitude at noon, and sets earlier. In northern latitudes, during the southern summer, say from September to December, the Sun rises later each day, is lower at noon, and sets earlier, while in the south, he rises earlier, reaches a higher altitude at noon, and sets later each day. This movement round the Earth daily is the cause of the alternations of day and night, while his northerly and southerly courses produce the seasons. When the Sun is south of the equator, it is summer in the south and winter in the north, and vice versa. The fact of the alternation of the seasons flatly contradicts the Newtonian delusion that the Earth revolves in an orbit around the Sun. It is said that summer is caused by the Earth being nearest the Sun, and winter by its being farthest from the Sun. But if the reader will follow the argument in any textbook, he will see that according to the theory, when the Earth is nearest the Sun, there must be summer in both northern and southern latitudes, and in like manner, when it is farthest from the Sun, it must be winter all over the Earth at the same time, because the whole of the globe Earth would then be farthest from the Sun. In short, it is impossible to account for the recurrence of seasons on the assumption that the Earth is globular and that it revolves in an orbit around the Sun. Gabrielle Henriette said, "The essential feature of the year is its division into 2 equal periods of 6 months, based first on the predominating length of the days over that of the nights, and vice versa, conditions which are governed by the varying hours of sunrise and sunset, and secondly, by the either high or low height reached by the Sun in the heavens at midday. The first cycle, during which the days are longer than the nights, and the Sun reaches its culminating point of the year, extends from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, i.e. March 21st to September 22nd, and the second cycle, during which, inversely, the duration of the nights exceeds that of the days, and the Sun descends to its lowest point of the year, extends from the autumn equinox to the spring equinox, i.e. September 23rd to March 20th. These 2 6-month periods are also characterized by an opposition of temperature. During the first cycle, which corresponds to spring and summer, the heat gradually rises and falls, while during the second cycle, the Arctic and Antarctic polar regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator should share similar conditions and characteristics such as comparable temperatures, seasonal changes, length of daylight, plant and animal life. In reality, however, the Arctic and Antarctic regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator differ greatly in many ways. Thomas Winship says, "If the Earth be the globe of popular belief, the same amount of heat and cold, summer and winter, should be experienced at the same latitudes north and south of the equator. The same number of plants and animals would be found, and the same general conditions exist. That the very opposite is the case disproves the globular assumption. The great contrasts between places at the same latitudes north and south of the equator is a strong argument against the received doctrine of the rotundity of the Earth. Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of approximately negative 57 degrees Fahrenheit and a record low of 135.8. The average annual temperature at the North Pole, however, is a comparatively warm 4 degrees. Throughout the year, temperatures in the Antarctic vary less than half the amount at comparable Arctic latitudes. The northern Arctic region enjoys moderately warm summers and manageable winters, whereas the southern Antarctic region never even warms enough to melt the perpetual snow and ice." Thomas Winship wrote, "This uniformity of temperature partly accounts for the great accumulation of ice which is formed, not on account of the great severity of the winter, but because there is practically no summer to melt it. In the Antarctic, there is eternal winter and snow never melts. As far north as a man has traveled, he has found reindeer and hare basking in the sun, and country brilliant with rich flora. Within the Antarctic Circle, no plant is to be found. The island of Kerguelen at 49 degrees southern latitude has only 18 species of native plants that can survive its hostile climate. Compare this with the island of Iceland at 65 degrees northern latitude. 16 degrees further north of the equator than Kerguelen is south, yet Iceland is home to 870 species of native plants. On the Isle of Georgia, just 54 degrees southern latitude, the same latitude as Canada or England in the north, where dense forests of various tall trees abound, the infamous Captain Cook wrote that he was unable to find a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. Cook wrote, "Not a tree was to be seen. The lands which lie to the south are doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, never to feel the warmth of the sun's rays, whose horrible and savage aspect I have not words to describe. Even marine life is sparse in certain tracts of vast extent, and the seabird is seldom observed flying over such lonely wastes. The contrasts between the limits of organic life in Arctic and Antarctic zones is very remarkable and significant. Vegetables and land animals are found at nearly 80 degrees in the north, while from the parallel of 58 degrees in the south, the lichen and such-like plants only clothe the rocks, and seabirds and the cetaceous tribes alone are seen upon the desolate beaches. In the Arctic, there are 4 clearly distinguished seasons, warm summers, and an abundance of plant and animal life, none of which can be said of the Antarctic. The Eskimo live as far north as the 79th parallel, whereas in the south, no native man is found higher than the 56th. W.N.R. Chambers, in Arctic Explorations, wrote, "Beyond the 70th degree of southern latitude, not a tree meets the eye. Wearied with the white waste of snow, forests, woods, even shrubs have disappeared, and given place to a few lichens and creeping woody plants, which scantily clothe the indurated soil. Still, in the farthest north, nature claims her birthright of beauty, and in the brief and rapid summer she brings forth numerous flowers and grasses to bloom for a few days, to be again blasted by the swiftly recurring winter. The rapid fervor of an Arctic summer had already, June 1st, converted the snowy waste into luxuriant pasture ground, rich in flowers and grass, with almost the same lively appearance as that of an English meadow." In New Zealand, situated at 42 degrees southern latitude, on the winter solstice, the sun rises at 4:31 a.m. and sets at 7:29 p.m., making the longest day of the year 14 hours and 58 minutes. On the summer solstice, the New Zealand sun rises at 7:29 a.m. and sets at 4:31 p.m., making the shortest day 9 hours and 2 minutes long. Meanwhile, in England, a full 10 degrees farther north of the equator than New Zealand lies south, the longest day is 16 hours and 34 minutes, the shortest day 7 hours and 45 minutes. Therefore, the longest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 36 minutes shorter than the longest day in England, and the shortest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 17 minutes longer than the shortest day in England. William Swainson, an Englishman who emigrated and became Attorney General of New Zealand in the mid-19th century, lived in both countries for decades and wrote of their differences, stating, "The range of temperature is limited, there being no excess of either heat or cold. Compared with the climate of England, the summer of New Zealand is but very little warmer, though considerably longer. Even in summer, people here have no notion of going without fires in the evening. But then, though the days are very warm and sunny, the nights are always cold. For 7 months last summer, we had not one day that the sun did not shine as brilliantly as it does in England in the finest day in June. And though it has more power here, the heat is not nearly so oppressive. But then there is not the twilight which you get in England. Here it is light till about 8 o'clock, then in a few minutes it becomes too dark to see anything, and the change comes over in almost no time. The seasons are the reverse of those in England. Spring commences in September, summer in December, autumn in April, and winter in June. The days are an hour shorter at each end of the day in summer, and an hour longer in the winter than in England. In the flat Earth model of the cosmos, these Arctic and Antarctic phenomena are easily accounted for and exactly what would be expected. If the sun circles over and around the Earth every 24 hours, steadily traveling from tropic to tropic every 6 months, it follows that the northern central region would annually receive far more heat and sunlight than the southern circumferential region. Since the sun must sweep over the larger southern region in the same 24 hours it has to pass over the smaller northern region, its passage must necessarily be proportionally faster as well. This is why the Antarctic morning dawn and evening twilight are very abrupt, whereas in extreme north, twilight continues for hours after sunset, and many midsummer nights the sun does not set at all. Dr. Samuel Robotham said, "If the sun is fixed and the earth revolves underneath it, the same phenomena would exist at the same distance on each side of the equator. But such is not the case. What can operate to cause the twilight in New Zealand to be so much more sudden, or the nights so much colder than in England? The southern hemisphere cannot revolve more rapidly than the northern. The latitudes are about the same, and the distance round a globe would be the same at 50 degrees south as at 50 degrees north. And as the whole would revolve once in 24 hours, the surface at the two places would pass underneath the sun with the same velocity, and the light would approach in the morning and recede in the evening in exactly the same manner. Yet the very contrary is the fact. The constant sunlight of the north develops, with the utmost rapidity, numerous forms of vegetable life and furnishes subsistence for millions of living creatures. But in the south, where the sunlight never dwells or lingers about a central region, but rapidly sweeps over sea and land, to complete in 24 hours the great circle of the southern circumference, it has not time to excite and stimulate the surface, and therefore, even in comparatively low southern latitudes, everything wears an aspect of desolation. These differences in the north and south could not exist if the earth were a globe, turning upon axes underneath a non-moving sun. The two hemispheres would at the same latitudes have the same degree of light and heat, and the same general phenomena, both in kind and degree. The peculiarities which are found in the south as compared with the north are only such as could exist upon a stationary plane, having a northern center, concentric with which is the path of the moving sun." And William Carpenter wrote, "Every year the sun is as long south of the equator as he is north, and if the earth were not stretched out as it is, in fact, but turned under, as the Newtonian theory suggests, it would certainly get as intensive a share of the sun's rays south as north. But the southern region being, in consequence of the fact stated, far more extensive than the region north, the sun, having to complete his journey round every 24 hours, travels quicker as he goes further south, from September to December, and his influence has less time in which to accumulate at any given point. Since, then, the facts could not be as they are if the earth were a globe, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe." The midnight sun is a phenomenon experienced by observers north of the Arctic Circle during summer solstice, where the sun can be seen circling over and around 360 degrees without ever setting. Depending how far north the observer is, the sun can be seen for several days or weeks, rising and falling as usual, but never fully setting beyond the horizon. This is because the sun, having reached the Tropic of Cancer, is making its tightest, narrowest circle over the Earth, so much so that observers positioned centrally within the Arctic Circle are never at any time significantly far enough away from the sun for it to set beyond their horizon. Not until after summer solstice, when the sun makes its way back towards the equator, will the sun set completely and the Arctic days begin getting shorter. Meanwhile, in the Antarctic during summer solstice, the sun disappears completely for over 2 months, leaving everyone below the Antarctic Circle in bitter cold darkness from mid-May to mid-July. Again, this is because the sun, narrowing and tightening its path towards the Tropic of Cancer, means it has moved significantly far enough away from the Antarctic perimeter so as not to be seen by observers positioned so far south. Not until mid-July, when the sun expands and widens its path back significantly far enough, will Antarctic observers again be able to see the sun above the horizon and the Antarctic days begin getting longer. In order to fit the heliocentric globe model, this midnight sun phenomenon must also occur for observers south of the Antarctic Circle during winter solstice. Depending how far south the observer is, the sun should be seen for several days or weeks, never fully setting, just like it does in the north. In reality, however, there is never 24-hour sunlight anywhere in Antarctica at any time of year. During winter solstice, when the sun is circling its widest path over and around the Tropic of Capricorn, observers far enough south will experience extended daylight. The Arctic and Antarctic climates are so strikingly dissimilar because of the drastically different amount of sunlight received by each. Based on the heliocentric globe model, both the Arctic and Antarctic receive comparable amounts of sunlight every year, and so should have comparable temperatures, seasonal changes, and ability to sustain plant and animal life, but in reality, differ greatly in these ways. Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of approximately -57 degrees Fahrenheit, and a record low of -135.8. The average annual temperature at the North Pole, however, is a comparatively warm 4 degrees. Throughout the year, temperatures in the Antarctic vary less than half the amount at comparable Arctic latitudes. The northern Arctic region enjoys moderately warm summers and manageable winters, whereas the southern Antarctic region native plants that can survive is south, yet Iceland is home to 870 species of native plants. On the Isle of Georgia, just 54 degrees southern latitude, the same latitude as Canada or England in the north, where dense forests of various tall trees of distinguished seasons warm, whereas in the south, no native man is found higher than the 56th. Since this one fact would destroy the heliocentric globe model, there is, and has been since the 1950s, an Antarctic treaty signed by over 50 countries banning all independent travel and exploration of the Antarctic. Excluding overpriced chaperoned penguin tours and government-approved contractors, nobody is allowed to step foot in Antarctica, especially not during winter solstice when there should supposedly be constant 24-hour sunlight. Since this particular lie is so important to the heliocentric facade, if you search online, you will find a couple videos purporting to show 24-hour sunlight in Antarctica. But just like the rest of the globe's pathetic video evidence, they are all fake. The most popular video allegedly showing an Antarctic 24-hour time-lapse actually has mountains accidentally layered over the video's text layer, proving it to be a calculated fraud. Other videos simply show an Arctic midnight sun time-lapse, but claim it to be from Antarctica. There are dozens of clearly genuine videos you can see online of the Arctic midnight sun, and you can freely travel above the Arctic Circle to experience it for yourself. Conversely, however, there are only a couple clearly fake videos online of the supposed Antarctic midnight sun, and you cannot ever freely travel there to experience it for yourself. Many people think that modern astronomy's ability to accurately predict lunar and solar eclipses is a result and proof positive of the heliocentric theory of the universe. The fact of the matter, however, is that eclipses have been accurately predicted by cultures worldwide for thousands of years before the heliocentric ball Earth was even a glimmer in Copernicus's imagination. Ptolemy, in the 1st century AD, accurately predicted eclipses for 600 years on the basis of a flat, stationary Earth with equal precision as anyone living today. All the way back in 600 BC, Thales accurately predicted an eclipse which ended the war between the Medes and the Lydians. And as far back as 3,000 years ago, the Chaldeans, Egyptians, Indians, Chinese, and others accurately predicted eclipses to within seconds of modern methods. Eclipses happen regularly, with precision, in 18-year cycles. So regardless of geocentric or heliocentric, flat or globe Earth cosmologies, eclipses can be accurately calculated independent of such factors. Another assumption and supposed proof of Earth's globular shape, heliocentrists claim that lunar eclipses are caused by the shadow of their ball Earth occulting the moon. The idea is that the sun, earth, and moon spheres perfectly align like 3 billiard balls in a row so that the sun's light casts the earth's shadow onto the moon. Unfortunately for them, this explanation is rendered completely invalid due to the fact that lunar eclipses have happened and continue to happen regularly when both the sun and moon are still visible together above the horizon. But for the sun's light to be casting Earth's shadow onto the moon, the three bodies must be aligned in a straight 180-degree syzygy. As early as the time of Pliny, there are records of lunar eclipses happening while both the sun and moon are visible in the sky together, and it continues happening during lunar eclipses to this day. In an attempt to explain away the inconsistencies in their theory, heliocentrists usually claim light refraction must be happening on a scale large enough to account for the phenomena. But even if this highly implausible, reverse-engineered damage control explanation is accepted, it cannot explain how earthbound observers are supposedly able to see 12,000 miles, 180 degrees around a globular Earth to objects on the other side. The reality is, eclipses are a far more occult and mysterious phenomenon than lining up 3 billiard balls. Lunar eclipses only occur during full moons, when the moon is at the crossing point of the ecliptic opposite the sun, and solar eclipses only occur during new moons, when the moon is at the crossing point of the ecliptic and aligned with the sun. Such solar and lunar conjunctions and oppositions happen a minimum of 4 times per solar year, and depending on their exact altitudes and observer location, will produce partial, total, or annular eclipses. In ancient cosmology, these lunar nodes and accompanying eclipses were personified as the gods Rahu and Ketu, often shown devouring the sun or moon. During solar eclipses, the new moon conjunction directly crosses the sun, causing the blackout effect, and during lunar eclipses, the full moon opposition to the sun causes the shadowy red tint. This phenomenon is wholly celestial, involving the luminaries and their regular interactions with one another, and not in any way terrestrial, involving the earth beneath our feet, causing upward casting shadows into the heavens. Earth is a level, motionless plane with the sun, moon, and stars revolving over and around us, just as you experience every day. The North Pole is the magnetic monopole center point, with Polaris, the North Pole star, situated directly above. Polaris is the only motionless star in the heavens, with all the other constellations revolving perfect circles over the Earth every night. The so-called planets, known to the ancients as wandering stars, were named such because they were observed then, as we can observe today, to wander the heavens, taking their own unique spirograph-like patterns, making both forward and retrograde motions over and around the Earth during their cycles. Meanwhile, the fixed stars were named such because they were observed then, as we can observe today, to stay fixed in their constellation patterns night after night, year after year, century after century, never changing their relative positions. If Earth was truly a tilting, wobbling, spinning space ball, as NASA and modern astronomy proclaim, rotating 1,000 miles per hour on its axis, revolving 67,000 miles per hour around the Sun, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the galaxy, and shooting off several million more miles per hour through the universe, the star patterns would never look the same 2 nights in a row, let alone be fixed in exactly the same constellations for thousands upon thousands of years. The reality is that the Earth and Polaris do not move, while everything else in the heavens revolves over Earth and around Polaris, east to west, like in a planetarium dome. Our Earth planetarium, however, is so vast that perspective won't allow any observer to see all the stars simultaneously from any one vantage point. We can see Polaris, Ursa Major and Minor, and other northern constellations from every point north of the equator simultaneously, but conversely, cannot see the so-called South Pole star, Sigma Octantis, the Southern Cross, or other outer constellations simultaneously from every point south of the equator, because they all sweep over a great southern arc from their rise in the evening to their setting in the morning. Facing north, the stars turn counterclockwise from right to left. Facing south, they turn clockwise from left to right. Facing east, they rise in front and set behind, while facing west, they rise behind and set in front. So their apparent motion, angle, and inclination changes depending where you are on Earth and what direction you are facing. But their actual movement is always east to west. this most important and highly censored topic, please follow the links in the description box to my documentary, The History of Flat Earth,